So you think you know the story of the first sin. Flip ahead in the Bible a few thousand years, and you'll find the Apostle Paul dropping a theological bombshell that seems to change the whole narrative. In Paul's letter to the Romans, he's absolutely laser focused on one person as the entry point for sin and death into the world, and it's not Eve. And if you guys haven't done so already, subscribe now. Romans 5:12 states, sin entered the world through one man. He keeps hammering this point home, saying things like, through trespass of one man death reigned, and that in Adam all die. But this isn't just a blame game. His whole point is to set up the ultimate comparison, Adam versus Jesus. He treats Adam as the official representative head of humanity, the guy whose epic failure wrecked everything. This makes a perfect parallel for Christ, the last Adam, who shows up as the new representative to save the day with his own perfect act. It's a clean one-for-one showdown, one man's disobedience bringing ruin, and another man's obedience bringing salvation. Now, Paul wasn't clueless. He knew Eve sinned first and even mentions her being deceived in 1 Timothy. But he intentionally sidelines her role in this specific argument to make his theological point about representation crystal clear. By framing Adam as the figurehead for the fall, Paul lays the groundwork for the whole doctrine of original sin and, more importantly, for the cure found in Christ. This idea is so central, it even has a name: federal headship. Think of it like this. God appointed Adam as the captain of Team Humanity, acting on everyone's behalf. So when he fell, he took the whole team down with him. With that kind of authority comes a world-shattering level of responsibility. So if Paul's case against Adam is the closing argument, let's rewind the tape and go back to the original crime scene in Genesis. The narrative absolutely confirms what we all think we know. Eve was the first one to break the rules. Quote, "So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate." That little detail, who was with her, is a game changer. It shows Adam wasn't off tending to the garden somewhere. He was right there, at least when the fruit was handed over, and he did nothing. He just passively followed her lead. Here's the kicker that Paul highlights later on. Their motivations were totally different. Scripture is crystal clear that Eve was the victim of a clever con. The serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness. But as Paul points out, Adam was not deceived. He knew exactly what was going on. He wasn't tricked or misled. He knowingly and willfully ate the fruit after Eve did. When God shows up for the inevitable confrontation, the whole situation gets even more telling. Who does he call out to first? Not Eve, the one who started it, but Adam. Where are you? The divine questioning sequence puts Adam on the stand before anyone else, making it clear who God considered primarily responsible. And when it's his turn to talk, Adam immediately tries to pass the buck, blaming the woman God gave me, a lame attempt to shift responsibility to Eve and even God himself. It doesn't work, and God doesn't let him off the hook. While Eve is also questioned and cursed, the narrative spotlight stays locked on Adam. The curse on the very ground is explicitly linked to his action. Because you have listened to the voice of your wife and have eaten of the tree, cursed is the ground because of you. In the end, even though both of them sinned and faced dire consequences, the Genesis account portrays Adam as the main one on the hook during the divine interrogation. So you might still be thinking, this seems a little unfair to Adam. Even if he was a silent partner, Eve still took the first bite. Let's get into the nitty-gritty theological breakdown of why the Bible treats Adam as the one ultimately responsible for the fall. First up is the creation order and what it implies about leadership. Adam was created first, before Eve. Scripture positions Eve as a suitable helper for him, a role that's incredibly important and complementary, but doesn't put her out in front. Because Adam was formed first and got God's command directly, he held a kind of primary responsibility from the get-go. As one commentary puts it, the husband was created to be the leader in the marital relationship. In this view, God questioning Adam first wasn't random. It was because he was holding the head of the family responsible for failing to lead and protect them. Adam was accountable for what went down on his watch, and God calling his name first strongly supports that idea. Then there's the massive detail of the original command itself. God gave Adam the one big rule: "But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die." Adam heard the law straight from the source. This gave him a greater knowledge of what was at stake and the duty to communicate and uphold that command. This is what makes his silence during the temptation so glaring. The text says he was with her, yet there's no record of him trying to step in, correct Eve, or protect her from the serpent. You could say his responsibility was to guard the garden and his wife, but he did not speak up. In a way, his failure to act, his sin of omission, is what set the stage for Eve's deception. At the end of the day, Adam was the one who knew better and had received the command firsthand, which is why he was held accountable for violating it. Then there's the massive difference between how they sinned. As Paul highlights in 1 Timothy 2:14, Adam was not the one deceived. Eve was tricked. She fell for a clever lie and could at least say, "The serpent deceived me." Adam didn't have that kind of excuse. His was a willful, conscious rebellion with full knowledge of the consequences. He chose to listen to his wife instead of God. In that moment, Adam completely failed as the moral leader. This is driven home by God's direct rebuke in Genesis 3:17. The problem wasn't that listening to his wife's counsel is always wrong, but that in this specific crucial moment, Adam chose to go along with Eve's sin rather than obey God's command. Instead of leading in righteousness, he followed his wife into disobedience, a tragic and complete inversion of the proper order. Okay, so this whole idea of Adam having a special leadership role might sound a little controversial, but it plugs into a key theme in Christian thought: the idea of equal value, but distinct roles. This view, especially popular in what's called complementarian theology, argues that men and women are absolutely equal in dignity and value before God, but that they were designed by God with different responsibilities. According to this understanding, God's original blueprint for creation involved the man lovingly leading and the woman intelligently helping. This wasn't a hierarchy of worth, but a complementary partnership that reflected both equality and order. As one summary puts it, both Adam and Eve were created in God's image, equal before God as persons and distinct in their manhood and womanhood. Distinctions in masculine and feminine roles are ordained by God as part of the created order. In other words, this isn't about women being less than men. Both genders equally reflect God's image and were tasked with stewarding creation. The critical detail here is that this order was established before the fall. Adam's headship in the family was part of the original plan, established before the fall, not as a result of sin. From this perspective, male leadership isn't some chauvinistic consequence of sin entering the world, but an intended part of the creation that God himself declared very good. So, if God set Adam up in a leadership role, it naturally follows that he also carried a much heavier weight of responsibility for what happened. It's a direct reflection of the age-old proverb, "To whom much is given, much is required." In Christian thought, authority isn't just about the privilege of being in charge. It's about service and total accountability. This is a theme hammered home all over the Bible. The New Testament, for instance, tells us that teachers will be judged more strictly and that husbands are held accountable to love their wives with the same self-sacrificing standard that Christ loved the church, which is a ridiculously high bar. Back in the Eden narrative, Adam was positioned as the keeper of the garden, so when things went sideways, the buck stopped with him. But Adam's transgression may go beyond being derelict in being the keeper of the garden. As one commentary notes, Adam was held responsible not only for his own sin, but possibly because he did not provide adequate protection for his wife, allowing her to sin as well. His sin wasn't just that he ate the fruit, it was that he completely failed to act as Eve's spiritual guardian when she was under attack, and then had the nerve to follow her into the same mistake. Now, I'm not going to say I necessarily buy into the idea of Adam being in a protector role, but I'm not going to just dismiss it either, especially when you consider that the Bible makes a point of telling us that he just stood there and let Eve eat the fruit. That piece of information wouldn't make any sense otherwise. This idea that God wants men to step into responsible leadership is a major theme. After the fall, things get messy. God's declaration to Eve that her husband will rule over you is often seen not as a new command, but as a tragic prediction of how sin would corrupt the relationship, turning partnership into a power struggle of harsh domination and resistance. God doesn't get rid of Adam's leadership role. Sin just makes the role loaded with friction. The rest of the biblical story can be seen partly as God's long-term project to redeem and fix these broken relationships. We see in the Old Testament where leaders like fathers and kings are held responsible for the moral state of their families and nations, and in the New Testament where husbands and fathers are specifically told to lead with love. This isn't because women are less capable or intelligent. Far from it. It's because in this view, headship is a call to humble service. The ultimate model for this is the relationship between Christ and the church, where the husband is meant to be an imperfect reflection of Christ. Christ's headship isn't tyrannical, it's sacrificial. He literally lays down his life for the church. That becomes the template for all human authority. You lay down your life for those under your care. Philosophically, this whole situation sets up two polar opposite blueprints for male responsibility, with Adam and Christ as the ultimate examples. In one corner, you have Adam. When confronted with evil, he totally failed to protect his bride and then caved, joining her in the wrongdoing. His brand of leadership was passive and selfish. In the other corner, you have Christ, the second Adam. He did the exact opposite, loving his bride, the church, so much that he gave himself up for her. He was proactive and completely self-giving, all to save those in his care. Christian thinkers have obsessed over this contrast for centuries. It's the story of Adam's bad leadership versus Jesus' perfect leadership. This puts a profound and heavy responsibility on men, especially husbands and spiritual leaders, to model themselves after Christ, not Adam. When Paul gives instructions on leadership, he's constantly pointing to Christ's example. The subtext is basically a giant flashing sign that says, don't be like Adam, who shirked his duties, but be like Christ, who took on the ultimate responsibility for the well-being of others. Adam's story teaches a brutal lesson. When a leader fails, their entire community suffers. Conversely, when a righteous leader succeeds, everyone under their care benefits. This is why in many Christian traditions, leaders like pastors or husbands are expected to answer for the state of their flock or household. Leadership isn't a title, it's a stewardship. Adam was entrusted with the garden and his wife, and his catastrophic failure was ultimately a failure of that stewardship, for which God held him completely accountable. Now it's worth hitting the pause button here to point out that not every Christian interpreter frames the story this way. The view that Adam had a special headship role that made him more responsible is a cornerstone of the complementarian perspective. But on the other side of the aisle, you have theologians in the egalitarian camp who read these same passages differently. They argue that Genesis never explicitly commands Adam to lead or protect Eve. Those ideas, they suggest, are read into the text by later interpreters rather than being stated outright. They also point out that God's big command was about a tree, not about marriage dynamics, and that the Hebrew word for helper, Ezer, doesn't automatically mean subordination, since God himself is called an Ezer in other parts of the Bible. From this viewpoint, Adam's sin was simply disobeying God, the exact same crime as Eve's, not some unique failure of male leadership. They stressed that God held both of them individually accountable, confronting each one and giving each of them consequences. For them, Paul's choice to pin everything on Adam in the book of Romans can be seen as a clever rhetorical device to set up his theological argument and explanation about Christ, rather than a definitive statement on gender hierarchy. The bottom line for this camp is that the fall was a tragic moment of shared responsibility. That said, for the vast majority of Christian history, the dominant view has definitely been that Adam's leadership role magnified his guilt. Early church heavy hitters like Tertullian and Augustine acknowledged Eve's sin, but still placed the greater blame on Adam, with Augustine famously writing that Adam is the one who brought sin into the world. Centuries later, major documents like the Westminster Confession of Faith stated that while they, Adam and Eve, were the root of mankind, the guilt was passed down to everyone through Adam's transgression. This reinforces the classic idea, Eve's sin counted as her own personal guilt, but Adam's sin was the one that counted for everyone representatively. What's more, the scriptures are full of moments that challenge men to step up and take on their responsibilities. This isn't a one-off thing. The Bible is filled with stories that hammer this point home. After Adam, you see figures like Abraham being commanded to lead his household in righteousness, and you see leaders like Eli, the priest, getting called out specifically because he failed to restrain his wicked sons. God even laments in the book of Ezekiel about looking for a man who would build up the wall and stand before me in the gap on behalf of the land. A desperate call for righteous leadership when none could be found. Fast forward to the New Testament and you have the Apostle Paul telling men to act like men, be strong, as it's translated in some versions of 1 Corinthians 16:13. The underlying message is always the same. When men abandon their God-given responsibilities, the fallout is huge. Families and entire societies suffered just as all of humanity suffered when Adam failed in his duty. On the flip side, when men do shoulder their responsibilities in a Christ-like way, it brings blessing. In Christian thought, this makes the burden of men both incredibly heavy and incredibly glorious. Now, this isn't to say that women have no responsibility. Eve certainly did, and the Bible is packed with stories of women making hugely impactful choices for both good and evil. But there is a distinct pattern of male accountability that threads all the way from Adam onward. The whole point of calling men to lead is never to indulge in male dominance or superiority. It's a call to servant leadership, to take the initiative in virtue and, possibly, to the protection of others. It's a divine call to be who He created you to be. Not passive, not abusive, but responsibly leading in love. When men abuse their authority or abandon their post, they are simply repeating Adam's original error. But when they love, serve, and lead well, they reflect something of Christ. In that sense, the original charge laid on Adam extends to all husbands, fathers, and leaders. Don't let the serpent wreak havoc while you stand there and watch. Guard the garden entrusted to you. Lead by obeying God first. But what do you guys think? Is Adam really the culprit here, or is Eve? Do you favor an egalitarian view or a complementarian view? Let me know in the comments below. God bless you guys, and be excellent to each other.